is with the dispute, is a dispute assessment officer with DSCB, and your role?
That's correct. So DSCB is an alternative dispute resolution process, mediation essentially, and my job involves fielding calls from clients, answering their questions about mediation, and ultimately assessing them for that process, and going through organising a session if it's required.
All right, John Brennan from David Betts from, pardon me, I'm losing that. David Betts from Consumer Affairs Victoria.
Yes, I'm based in the Regulatory Transaction Centre, and the Regulatory Transaction Centre is effectively Consumer Affairs Processing Centre. We process everything from occupational licensing, which is real estate agents, right through to the not-for-profit sector, which is specifically the incorporated association, which we're here to talk about today. My role within the Regulatory Transaction Centre is really, it's a combination of working on the business and within the business. I look at the interface between how we actually operate and how we're engaging with the community and with our programs, and look at ways of how we can improve that. So often I'm the one that gets the problems as when they can't be resolved, they come to me and I start to pick them apart. My background is really, I was the registrar for registrations for quite a number of years, so this is my space. So I'm happy to be here to talk to you about these issues.
Thank you. Anna. Anna is a senior lawyer with a very interesting group called Not-for-Profit Law. So Anna, you can tell us a bit about it.
Sure. Not-for-profit law, we're a service of Justice Connect, and particularly the work I do is providing training to community groups. So we work with a lot of local councils all around Victoria and deliver training to their groups around issues like governance, about managing conflicts and disputes and understanding their roles and responsibilities to avoid these things coming up in the first place. So that's a key part of what we do, among other things, but there's plenty of information on our website about our services.
Thank you. We go to the next slide now. Thank you. So we'll just go straight to, we've devised a hypothetical scenario based on the collective experience of all people around the table. So have a look at that. We have again, a hypothetical council called C-Bank. A lot of people are over the age of 60, and they have come together in the C-Bank Senior Citizens Clubs. And the problem that we're going to be discussing today is one that I think Maria has some experience of. Maria, you have been, as a council worker, as the positive aging worker, as the Seniors Club supporting worker, could you tell us a little bit about the scenario that we're all going to discuss today, please?
Okay. So the scenario is such that we've got a Senior Citizens Club that have been incorporated for 10 years. They've got a membership of people aged over 65 years of age. They operate on model rules. And their main activities, like lots of Senior Citizens Clubs, is socialisation, getting together for tea, coffee, perhaps a lunch, and also doing some fundraising activities to raise some funds for their club so they can continue to operate. So they generally, like many Senior Citizens Clubs, they have low operation costs and they get to use council facilities for free. Most of their income comes from annual membership fees. They do receive a council grant for senior citizens groups, and as I mentioned before, they also do an occasional fundraiser, so they've got enough money to essentially direct their work.
Yep, that sounds like a pretty standard Senior Citizens Clubs, pretty standard that they are organised as an incorporated association. But if we could just talk a little bit about the obligations. I know that they have the cultural aspect of it, the cultural, the meeting and engagement and all of that, but surely there are some very standard obligations that they are required legally.
Yeah, I just want to talk a little bit around the structure of an incorporated association. So with this scenario, we can assume that there are 3 tiers that most incorporated associations fall under. We can assume that this is a tier 1. association with a revenue base less than $250,000. So it's a small organisation. And they must keep financial records and submit those to Consumer Affairs on an annual basis. And there are some requirements around notifying when you have changes of office holders and when you change circumstances and addresses and those sorts of things. So that's really the formal structure of the organisation, and I guess it's relevant for members and board members to be mindful of those obligations as they move through engaging in the multi-property organisation.
Right, so at the moment, I'm going to just assume that this is all taken care of and that we're at present when Pat, the council worker, has first heard about it. It's still relatively at the behaviour stage, where there are complaints of bossiness, there's complaints of people being rude, and particularly these complaints are about the secretary, Vera, and they are currently being made by one person, Angie, about Vera's behaviour. And also that comes to you, Maria. What would you do? How would you support her?
Well, initially I would get the side of the story of Angie, who's making the first complaint, and obviously speak to all the committee members, getting an understanding of what is the issue here that has come to hand, and getting an understanding of perhaps what their skill level is in terms of maybe, or their understanding actually of what their role is as a committee member within their club, and also getting a bit of an understanding for what their skill level might be in being able to actually resolve this level of conflict. I would be thinking already about whether they might actually need to go to certain services for mediation. So perhaps John, you can tell us a little bit more about, is this type of scenario something that would be suited to mediation?
Sure, and absolutely. On the face of it, I guess the way we typically operate is to say yes and then assess any concerns, and I guess really that means that we don't say no unless there's the existence of family violence. That's really our main disqualifier. I think there are a few things to talk about, but perhaps I'll just quickly explain what mediation is. It's a free, confidential, voluntary process whereby parties would sit in a room and attempt to negotiate their way towards a shared resolution. It's not a determinative process, so it's not where someone's going to be telling them, that someone's right or someone's wrong. And with that in mind, there are a few things that we look for. I think things around, do we have the right people? So we're asking questions about, do they have the authority to make decisions in this sort of situation? Because you can only make an agreement, I guess, about your own behaviour, really. And I guess if there are issues with the president, then maybe he needs to be there, maybe he needs to represent himself, and maybe there are other people that are also involved in the dispute. If the president, the president needs to come, then are there issues there with power imbalance? We've said that he's slightly frail. Are there issues around, I guess whether there is going to be any concerns that one person is going to have the upper hand in a negotiation. With that in mind, it's about having equity, I guess, and equality between parties. We get a lot of situations where groups of members will raise issues about one person, the president or a secretary, someone on the committee. And I guess when it comes to assessing for mediation, we'll typically be looking for that equal playing field. So do more people need to come from one side? Do we need more bodies? Do we need fewer bodies? With regards to having the simplicity of the process, we actually want as few people there as possible, but then still giving them the opportunity to resolve the dispute. So I think if everyone's not there that needs to be there, then we may have issues, but of course we need to be aware of the equity of the situation. The other thing that I'll quickly talk about as well, are there substantive issues to be discussed? Is there something that can be negotiated over? And certainly behavioural and communication issues are I would say 99% of mediations, that's a standing agenda item, is communication. Often that leads to, or that's a result of communication issues, are a result of deeper underlying issues sometimes, or it's vice versa. But that's certainly something that, you know, could be discussed here. Angie perhaps would be making requests of Vera to communicate more effectively or more politely with her members. That's mediation, but then also I just want to sort of highlight that DSCV do run workshops with community groups as well. That chiefly falls around that communication aspect. So it's training, helping people sort of develop better interpersonal communication. And I think Anna as well was going to talk a little bit about how, you know, how you sort of deal with that, but more from a government standpoint.
Yeah, it's I think the other side of that too. I think the behavioural and communication side of things is so important because that's what we see underlying so many disputes that may also have a legal flavour, but often it is a personality issue or a behavioural issue. So I think that's really crucial. And then I guess the other side of it is making sure that people do understand what their legal obligations are, what's required of them by consumer affairs and other regulators. So that's where we come in and provide training around governance issues as well. But it is really good to have both angles.
David, would you say that, okay, with the best will in the world, with the best desire to resolve things by mediation, that it is pretty critical that everyone concerned should be, as a precursor to any dispute arising, should skill themselves up in how to communicate and in their roles and things? That seems to be the added skill that organisations need. Would you say that?
Exactly. I think it's it brings us back to the point I made earlier around people that are involved in these organisations have obligations and responsibilities, and one of those responsibilities is to if you put your hand up to say I want to be a committee member or I want to be a treasurer, you really need to have the skills to do that or conduct that function. And if you haven't got them, then you should proactively seek them, because it's often that people want these positions and they put their hand up and they say, well, I'm happy to be the secretary, I'm happy to be the treasurer, and that's where the problems start to occur and then start to spiral. So I think it's extremely relevant at this point to say that there are resources out there, and members and committee members should actually access those if they need them, because it needs to be a proactive responsibility in that space.
And that might be something that a council worker like Pat could take a leading role with doing. So it's a bit tricky sometimes when you are a person that can't give legal advice, but certainly you can guide groups towards finding the resources they need. So whether that's our not-for-profit law information hub has resources that deal with the legal duties of board members of incorporated associations. Consumer Affairs has great resources, but often these committee members or board members might not even know where to go to find those resources. So that can be something that a council worker might be able to guide them towards.
Yeah, I think that's really crucial. At which point, I think council workers need to know at which point they need to refer further, that this is no longer me doing my role as a senior, a group support worker. We need some other. And would you say, particularly this concerns me, like could we have the next slide, please, David? Thank you. So at this point, you can see that there is some, a hint at least, that club funds might be being used for a private event. So when you're talking about things like misappropriation being a possibility and then failure to keep records and things, at which point would you say I need to call Dispute Settlement Centre or not-for-profit law or even CAP?
Probably fairly early in this scenario to get some advice for myself. Maybe she's misappropriating funds, but also maybe going a step back regarding, well, how is she actually being able to access bank accounts, because there are signatories to bank accounts within clubs. So again, some of these rules fallen by the wayside with this community group in terms of the treasurers should be responsible for electoral funds plus one other person. For some of the basics around this club next with them. But definitely I'll be probably bringing DSSV to find out about how the situation can be managed in terms of bringing these people together to maybe have a conversation, or maybe even get some coaching myself. That's a possibility, to find out how I can maybe just do some early work with them, and then at what point I'll say, okay, it's time for this group to now take it to the next level and actually go into some mediation.
Can I just say something on that particular slide? Often consumer affairs, we get contacted with organisations that are in disarray or turmoil, and we might get a letter that spells out this type of conduct. And I guess consumer affairs' position really is that the structure is designed for individuals and committees and members to be able to resolve the issue themselves. Often they skip that step and they come straight to us, and we'll look at those and we'll say, well, where are the facts and what is actually happening there? And so often it's there's a lot of hearsay involved, there's a lot of assumptions involved. We will make our own inquiries, particularly if it's in relation to elements that we're concerned about around reporting, financial management, those sorts of things. And I would have to say that at this stage, this point, there is a lot of nitpicking. You can see the personality differences coming out, and the two sides forming up their argument. So I think at this point, what we're trying to inject is a sense of reality and a sense of balance at that stage, and I think that's where other agencies would be able to assist in moderating some of this conduct.
So how about dispute settlement? Does it have to be at the level of agreements, or can you mediate before that, as Maria was saying, to get it a little bit earlier?
Well, typically with regards to actual mediation, there does need to be something to be discussed. There typically needs to be some dispute. However, with regards to actually contacting our service, we invite people to call us at the earliest possible opportunity. We provide a lot of advice around how mediation works. We're very open with our process and discussing, what's going to be suitable and what may be suitable for other agencies. We have also some quite good referral pathways, in my opinion, in terms of, the advice that we provide to people we don't think will be suitable. But certainly, as David was saying, I think people can be perhaps overly litigious or certainly very excited about enforcing their legal rights. And I think we do a lot of reality checking there as well, and just saying, what can you accomplish through a legal avenue, and what other things are going on here. And I guess that's where mediation really offers a great advantage, because there are the opportunity to address things like communication styles and different processes and that kind of thing. Very flexible in what can be discussed at a mediation session.
So would you say that you could not just help the members or the office bearers or the people in dispute, but could you help someone in Maria's position, or in this case in Pat's position, to say, these are the skills, we'll give you some skills so that you can go back to your group and be able to support them?
Certainly. We do a lot of conflict coaching over the phone with what we call sort of instigators or initiators, so people who are not actually involved in the dispute, but who call us and say, I've got clients or people in my council who are them about how our service can help as well, and that's just over the phone. We also do, as we sort of mentioned, some training out there in the community for other services.
So, Anna, would you do a similar kind of governance training for workers? Is there the opportunity?
Absolutely. And so again, it's coming from that perspective of helping people in council to understand what the obligations are of the committee members. So if you take the example that's on the slide at the moment, what we see there, of course it's a bit of a hearsay situation, but again, it's this concept of committee members or board members might not know that they have a duty not to misuse their position for their own personal gain, which potentially Vera might be doing. They also are operating as a not-for-profit, so it's not okay to be using the assets of the group to hold a personal event. And sometimes, although we're not trying to equip council workers to feel that they need to be the person giving advice or interpreting the dispute, I think sometimes just having that knowledge base is really important to know where everyone stands. But I'd absolutely agree with what John said about when people come to the party to discuss an issue, whether it's a dispute or in a mediation, the latching on to legalities of things can be a bit, it seems the quick right solution sometimes to just look for a provision of the rules, but what's behind it is something a bit more, a bit deeper. And so what we find and what we say in our training is that it's so important to keep taking everyone back to what the purposes of the group are. So rather than trying to think about the personalities involved, the specifics involved, why are we here, what are the purposes of the group, and making sure that everyone keeps on track with that. Is that part of the mediation process to keep sort of trying to find that shared vision? Or
yeah, absolutely. Finding somewhere that there's a commonality, and I think we do a lot of reminding of that, particularly in organisations like this where they start from what is often a very noble or a good social cause. We do a lot of that and say, do you think maybe this has slipped? You do have a common view, I think, and we have to sort of remind people of that a little bit. And I think mediation, it's not a magical process in that it can't mend friendships that perhaps shouldn't be there or, produce unicorns and rainbows, but I think there is a lot of opportunity to keep, where there is going to be an ongoing relationship, to keep those fairly civil. I think that's a great advantage of our process.
So, David, so there are certain situations, correct me if I'm wrong, like the first dot point. I mean, Vera is not eligible to be a member of the group because she's too young. Would that be the sort of thing that you would say, okay, she can be asked to leave? Or would that be the sort of thing where you would say, look, that's just a technicality, how would you, because that seems to me like a perfect answer. She's not eligible, off you go.
Well,
just the
yeah, so I guess the question, well, and on the previous slide too, there are probably other things that have jeopardised, her eligibility to be on the committee as well. And so we were just having a conversation around how before we started the application of strict membership criteria. If it is in a group's rules that this is a condition of membership, then yes, technically speaking, a person is not eligible to be a member if they don't meet those. The model rules, though, don't set those out, so a group would actually have to put those in order to have them in the rules. But again, I suppose before we get to that point, looking at other ways to diffuse situations is really valuable, as opposed to looking for, the provision of the rules, like that golden nugget that will help us to resolve the dispute in the rules. But perhaps from Consumer Affairs Victoria, the idea of membership criteria, do you have a different view on that, David?
Yeah, look, I think it's, we don't really have enough detail to work out exactly whether she should be expelled or not, but I guess, she may have put in an application to be a member. She might have lied on the application form, so the committee might ask her to verify her age, provide evidence or proof. It might be that other members have it's been a conduct of the organisation to accept, members who are, retirees rather than of a specific age. So it might be a systemic situation, in which case you couldn't focus on just one member. To fix this, they may need to go to special resolution and actually put something into their rules. So it's not something that I think, you could hang your book on and say, oh, well, because she's, 64 and 9 months old and doesn't reach 65, that we can kick her out. I don't think that's, that would be the solution in any case. So it might be one factor of many in terms of her conduct and her engagement with the organisation, but it won't be the sole factor that will solve the problem.
And there are provisions built into the model rules whereby that the members can decide that they want to request that a special general meeting of members is held. So there's a process that very clearly sets out what's required. So you need at least 10% of the members and you need to request it in writing. And then the committee does have to hold a meeting, and in theory then they can vote to remove a committee member. I guess the thing is, sometimes these things do play out in practice, and there's been a couple of, well, at least one very highly publicised case where this has happened. But when you've got a group of members that want to form an alternative committee, but the thing is, I guess, the risks in this are that things get even more inflamed, I suppose, sometimes. So that's why I would always say if we can think of another way to address the issue before having to resort to those sorts of methods, to always take it back to mediation, but there's definitely a role to play in sort of sometimes seeing those more extreme measures as a last resort.
There's an element of leadership required here too, and that's with the committee, and you can sort of see that there's a gap given that the chair is not well, and it might just be that there's there is that lack of leadership happening within the committee. So I would say that many of these issues should be dealt with at the committee level. If the secretary is not conducting her function appropriately, the committee could actually vote, have a revote of the positions and restructure the committee management. And that could also be for the chair. So if the chair is not well, perhaps the chair should be standing down and there should be a new chair. So there are other elements that need to be looked at in this particular scenario, and that might assist in moving forward.
Just for all of these options would be something that the council worker would need to get their head around and then communicate to the. At what point do you think you would be comfortable as a council worker to say, all right, I'm assuming that the crunch comes when you have to raise the issue of do we suspend or withhold your funding. Would that be the point before you say that to a group, that you can say, we need you to follow your procedures, get people together and do your job? Would that be right?
Well, I mean, that's always going to be a point to the end of the line, because when groups receive funding, there's always criteria that they must meet in order to maintain that funding. But again, if I was working with a group like this, it would be about getting to know them and where they're at, how they've actually come to arrive at the situation. But certainly issues around not operating effectively, not meeting as a committee on a regular basis, they would all need to be addressed, because at the end of the day, that's going to determine whether this group can actually sustain itself. It would also be about having conversations with them about the individual positions within the committee, and do they want to continue with them? If they do, how can that be resourced, or what are some of the other options around perhaps getting some newer people to come on and mentoring them perhaps as well to come into those positions. And that could be something that can take a bit of time to do also. But certainly the fact that that they are, they're not meeting at all, perhaps there's no communication amongst them at all as well. There is that urgency that they really do need to resolve the conflicts, otherwise this club potentially will fold, and then there are many people who will feel the impact of that.
I suppose that takes us back to what John was saying earlier, is how do you diffuse one situation while foregrounding the reason that they got together in the first place. So, would you say that then if you are responsible for a club, that your monitoring and your kind of oversight would have picked this up earlier?
Well, that depends on your own personality, I think, as well, of your own level of observation and interaction.
Fair enough, yeah.
But if it was me, as I said, I would, and I've been working closely with a group like this, things would have come to the fore. There would have been discussions amongst different people. They would have been ringing you individually and saying this is going on and that's going on. So you would have, started to put a bit of a picture together about what's taking place in this group. And I mean, I would be thinking at the back of my mind, is there a need for mediation? And you know, letting them know very early in the piece that I might not be able to assist them with resolving these issues, and that they would need to actually think about that. So also planting that seed in their mind fairly early in the piece that they might actually need to come together under an independent group or independent body to thrash out what these issues are. And as John was saying, always bringing them back to the fact that you come together based on a core value, and that's why you want to continue as a community group.
Can I just make a general statement around what we're seeing with incorporated associations and funding agencies in general? As the dollar becomes tighter, funding agencies are actually starting to look at what their criteria is around providing that funding, what the organisation's capability is in managing that funding. So that comes back to the earlier discussion around committee members skilling up to understand exactly what their responsibilities are. So we're seeing agencies setting performance targets. So, for example, in this case, it might be that they have to have that positive ageing festival engagement, or they risk losing their funding, etc. And then often there are touch points where funding agencies will actually monitor what's going on with their funding. So have they reached that stage? Have they commenced that program yet? Have they done what they need to do in terms of reporting back? Because each bucket of money has accountabilities tied to it now. And if you look at the string of funding that might go from through the different tiers of government, there are greater responsibilities certainly from the funding agencies to report back on the delivery and administration of those sorts of things. So we can see a general trend towards tightening of governance towards the distribution level. So on the monitoring side, we will see a trend of that increasing as well. Yeah. So these sorts of things would probably appear or become more obvious sooner than what they might have in the past.
And also on that point, David, that can also be the pressure point that might actually push some committee members to saying, I cannot do this role any longer. The accountability requirements are becoming harder. We talk about an ageing population of seniors where they could be impacting health issues for themselves, their extended family. So there are lots of other complex things that could be happening in the space as well. And sometimes the concern about meeting their funding requirements is where they might say, I just can't do this anymore. Maybe it's time for me to move on, and then new blood can then actually come through and participate in that group.
And what we hear sometimes too is that having that discussion can sometimes be a bit of a relief to people if they've been on a committee for a long time, but they feel an obligation to continue with that. Sometimes having that option to have some succession planning and finding people to come in and take their place can be a positive thing. Of course, not always. Some people might be quite attached to that position, but certainly having that dialogue around it, and also that acknowledgement. I think I agree so much that the climate around funding and governance and accountability has changed, so much so that what might have begun as something not very social, very informal, now looks like something quite different, particularly if you've been in a board for 20 odd years and the law's changed, a lot of rules have changed, and suddenly it might just be, with all other life factors combined, not something you wish to do. And for those who do wish to continue availing themselves of the training and resources that are out there. So hopefully there's something that can help people at both ends, yeah.
I think that if we could go to the next one, I think David had picked up on this a little bit earlier, and I want to come back to it. Which is the last sentence there, which is a president of the club who is not disengaged or not adequately engaged because of poor health and probably advancing years. I think that was mentioned earlier on. Now, what impact would health and aging have on things like mediation or other procedures? You were saying that it's one of the ways in which you look at people who come to you is, are they the right people?
Sure. And it's our job, I guess, to conduct that assessment and then work out what the impact is to the client. Typically, we just ask them, we say, do you have any specific requirements that we need to be aware of? and they may disclose, let's say, a hearing issue, and then we just notify our mediators, make any adjustments that we can to the process to essentially assist them. I think there's a lot of flexibility there with regards to what we can do for people. So really, again, we say no to basically nothing at first instance, and we just sort of work out what the impact is, and then really just manage it from there.
And would you?
I think just in the issue of poor health, we're seeing it also. I guess it's a problem across a number of different sectors. So we also manage patriotic funds, which relate to return services and the like. And it's a touch of reality that a club that may have been in existence for 5 or 10 years or even 20 years have a cohort of members that are getting older and less capable of managing their governance structure and keeping up with technology and some of the other elements that are sort of thrown into the mix. So that element of succession planning is very important, but it might not always be an available option. So we've had a couple of clubs that have come through and their membership has dwindled. They weren't able to form a committee, but they still required those services. So we were able to facilitate a discussion with the funding agency where they took over an auspicing role, and then the club decided that they would fold. So it was almost a natural attrition of that club, and that would be a better outcome than the club, dissolving because of conflict and flying apart and wasting resources in legal fees and all sorts of other things. So I think it comes down to that leadership, the touch of reality that, and I guess in essence a pragmatic approach as to what is the best outcome for the individuals concerned and what was the original purpose for why we formed, and keeping an eye on that main goal. Because when personalities get involved, it then becomes about the conflict and not about the service or the purpose of why the organisation originally formed. And that's one of the critical components that everyone needs to maintain a view to, and that is what's the end game.
So would you think then that one of the ways to manage if things are completely out of hand is to go back to your funders, offer yourself to be auspiced for a while, undertake to sort out everything, and then possibly... It's one solution. It might not be the solution for this scenario. This is about a conflict, and it looks like we don't have details on the number of members, but it looks like some of the committee members aren't in a position where they can carry out their function and their duty. And it looks like that some of the members are not happy about what's happening in the committee. And so I think, from my perspective, it looks like it's very early days, and before it festers too badly, they should be seeking help, through these other resources that we've talked today, to try and resolve those issues before they get out of hand. That sounds pretty good. We've sort of gone through the scenario itself. Is there anything that we need to revisit in here that so we've talked about monitoring, prevention and training for council workers as well as members and office bearers. We've talked about what you can do with each of these organisations. What do you think, and I'm throwing this open to everyone, what would you think would be another avenue to help yourselves in supporting a seniors club? Has anybody done anything interesting or outside the box on this one? Or have you heard that somebody's done something?
This has opened up other avenues for me, so I'm kind of new in the position I'm in.
Okay.
But we've had a seniors group, and particular husband and wife were on the committee, and over years, even before I wasn't there, things were going on. Now finally they've gone their own way, but the other party has started their own seniors group within the centre. And it's still ongoing. It's just I'll resolve one thing, then it's something else, then something else, and something else. That it got that bad that they were both at the centre, and the person who started the group still attends the other seniors group, even though she's got her own seniors group, which I guess she has the right to do. But they're saying she was conducting a business and collecting money during that time, and she was saying she wasn't, and they're both on the phone, and so I said, this is mentally affecting my mental health, and I've got other work to be doing. And so we actually sat down, the 4 of them together, because it was getting to, one was saying one was violent and touched her, and so after the steering committee, we sat down so they could have that discussion and just get it, because it is personality. It's been going on for years. And that was actually really good, because they did resolve for a while, but now that was resolved, what the issue was, now it's got that far that they'll take the centre phone, one group will take the phone home so the other person can't use the phone while it's, but I found that really good, bringing them together, and from what you said about the purpose of why they're both doing groups, work together, you're both there to deliver the same services to your community, just focus on that, and that's what I've been saying, I'll just focus on that, don't worry, but still they'll find something to, like I've got this trip running, I'm going to run this trip and I'm going to make it cheaper, and I'm going to do it on the same day. It's got that. So it seems like you resolve one, and we brought them together, and then it's another thing and another thing. It's email after email, and I'm thinking, I'm not here to, like, where do I stop saying, you know what?
And when do you pass on? So
That's
do you have a better
right
idea now at which point to say, I'm done, here are some resources that you as office bearers and members need to go, scale up and then come back to council.
Yeah.
But you raised a really important point there about various allegations. So you, in your situation, it was an allegation of assault. And how does that play out? So whether it's assault or bullying or name calling, where does that fit in? Would that be addressed by the training, or?
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's important to note that if there is ever an allegation that someone is doing something illegal, and it's credible, that we don't try and resolve that internally. If the police need to be involved, that those avenues are there. So people shouldn't feel that they need to navigate something very extreme alone. In the training, we do look at a board's obligation around risk management, and that includes occupational health and safety, making sure that there is an organisation that's free from things like bullying and other things that could potentially harm people. The problem often can be, though, when that bullying is thought to be coming from the board. So they're the ones with the oversight, but if they're thought to be the ones engaging in that behaviour, in reality it is really, really difficult to sometimes resolve those issues. But I do wonder, I guess, with the council, you've got that ability to make a call about when enough's enough if you're effectively controlling the funding. And we talked earlier about having charters of conduct within groups, and I don't know if councils have a similar process where if these are the expectations that need to be followed to access funding. I have no idea. I'm not recommending that necessarily, but just to think about what are some of the ways that you can kind of put some parameters around what's acceptable.
Certainly at the Whittlesea Council, we observed, and again, having so many clubs, there was a bit of a common theme coming out with conflict in quite a few clubs. And we talked to the group, we talked to them about perhaps having a code of conduct within the club. And so to try and move that along, what we actually did was we invited clubs to come together and form a working group and develop a template of code of conduct. So council officers sort of led the working group, and I was involved in that process. And there were about maybe 10 to 12 clubs that came along with representatives, and it was focused on what is the purpose of your club, why do you come together? And from that, got them to brainstorm ideas around how they would like to see their club operate, how they would like to see the atmosphere within the club, one of harmony and socialisation, so on and so forth. And it was a good process because they actually defined a template, or came up with a template for what a code of conduct is. And then we gave that to the clubs and said, you're welcome to use this if you like, you can modify it, whatever it is that suits your needs. We actually have it translated as well because there are a number of linguistically diverse community groups that meet in the city of Whittlesea. And I mean, again, it's quite limited because it's not a legal document. However, it does, it's a resource that they can use to remind their members that, when you come here, we want you to come together in a peaceful and a harmonious manner. And sometimes I'll wave it and say, have you read this? And, when you sign up, we'll give you a copy of this. And these are kind of like the rules of our club as such. So it's a way of maybe brokering that step before conflict can actually start to arise. And it's not the perfect tool and it doesn't always work, but it's probably just a reminder to people that, there is a reason why you're coming together as a group of people to socialise.
Well, that word brokering is, I think, really, really crucial. I'm sorry, I didn't get your name, but you are from you're not at council, you're a member of a club.
No, well, we do have stakeholders like the council, Victoria owns the seabed side of it, and the council owns the land side of it, which is where our club is based. And it's a 150-year-old club, so it's got a lot of history. Unlike the Senior Citizens Club, where you'd expect the majority of members to be retired, ours is the opposite. We've got a lot of members who are time poor because they've got young families or they've got jobs or 2 jobs and so forth. And it's extremely difficult to maintain a coherent committee of management because I found that we've got this high churn rate because of a certain clinical membership will not change. They'll say this is the constitution, and if I come along and I say, well, 150 years ago that may have been appropriate, it's not anymore. And then you have this fun fight where over time we got to a stage 3 years ago where you could not hold a committee of management meeting because we couldn't get a quorum. Everyone that we tried to get one of the committee, we got on one for 12 months, and they said, well, this is just too hard. I don't know what happened with this. This is where I think the governance and David's people would come in extremely useful for me, that I could then tell the membership in general or any new committee, look, there is training available so that you can get up to speed, and succession planning so that we've got always a couple of members who are there that can come in here for one committee and then like don't have a when we manage, it's difficult, because we are not non-profit, so we don't employ people. We've tried getting an administration person in to just, answer emails on the phones and distribute things like nomination forms for committee. They don't last. So I don't know, how can you get people to stay? Probably it is because in senior citizens there's more time on their hands and they've got time to be more stable over the years, whereas we found that the young people don't get involved in the committee level. It's difficult. It's only since I've been retired that I've tried to invoke some change. But you've always got that core people. If you get enough people in terms of 15% of the management to hold a general meeting, so that you can then, give them a reason why things need to be changed in certain areas after 150 years. And
that's a very valid point, and that's impacting on a lot of clubs as well, because I guess in the old days you walk down to your local centre and you might have been part of a club. These days you can get online and you can do lots of other things as well. So there's competition for time, certainly for members, but also for activities. And I think it's a relevant point too that people are working multiple jobs and longer hours and different hours. So then that the weekend is no longer the weekend. They could be working till late into the evening. So it's a challenge for clubs across the board. And I don't think there's any single answer, and I think it's a lot of good minds have attempted to resolve this, and I don't think we're there yet.
Yeah, well, you see, in my past life before I retired, I've been on committee management with various unions, and so I'm sort of familiar with the rules of debate and and management, meeting protocols and stuff like this. But at our community level, they would just say, I don't know what you're talking about. What's a notice of motion, let alone, voting for or against it or abstaining, and a lot of it comes down to a chair, obviously, in every team.
And we've seen that over time as well, that those skills they seem to have diminished, and in the old days, the good old days, there was a greater understanding because there was a lot more of that, committee and clubs stuff happening. These days, it seems to be a lot more informal, and people that come in are well-intentioned but don't understand what the protocols are, and that's what we were talking about governance earlier on. So they're critical components, particularly when disagreements arise, and any good club or organisation will have disagreements. It's being able to manage that conflict and get the best out of it, not letting it spiral into some sort of self-destructing, element.
Can you type another question?
Yes, I had a question from one of our online participants who called me, and I think it's almost the opposite side of the question we've had, which is how do you get rid of a very persistent committee member, as in how many times can they renominate, and is there a way that, or how can you get rid of them, was the exact words that the participant asked.
Well, the key thing is to follow the process in the rules. So rules will differ on the removal of committee members, and there are some organisations that have rules that will have a maximum term or a maximum number of times that you can have a term on the committee. I think it's right to say the model rules don't have that. So we often work with community groups that have 20 years on the board or longer before, they still just stay on and on. So I guess the process then is to think about, well, there's a couple of options around whether the members vote to remove that member. It sort of depends a bit, that committee member, it depends a bit on what the processes are for election for that particular group.
It also comes down to the members. So one of my sayings is that the members get the board or the committee they deserve, and if no one's willing to put their hand up to stand against individuals or be committee members, and the same old committee members keep putting their hand up, and they go in unopposed or unelected because there are not enough members standing, then the members get that committee and they deserve it. So I guess one of the solutions to that is really, as a member, be much more proactive, or as a membership group, be much more proactive. Be prepared to put your hand up, be prepared to participate, understand what you're putting your hand up for, and that should then strengthen the organisation.
Now I have another question as an audience member, just for John. Could you give people just a quick description of what actually happens at a mediation? You don't have to go through all the steps, just to give a bit of a synopsis.
Sure, yeah. I guess, so parties are invited into the room. There are 2 trained mediators in the room at all times. Their job is just to facilitate the process. It's not about determining an answer or saying that one party's right or wrong. It's just about helping them communicate respectfully. They would essentially invite parties to provide a summary of the dispute from their side of things, use that to formulate an agenda, and that gives them a framework for the discussion. The mediators also take the opportunity to talk to parties individually in private, and that's where I think a lot of the good work goes on. I think you'll find that a lot of times that's where parties start becoming a little bit more malleable in what they're willing to negotiate over, and I think that's probably, once they come back together, that's where some of the magic happens. And then it's just about working through the items and finding hopefully some sort of common ground that they can both agree on. And I think, it's a good faith process, so at the end of the day, it's not enforceable by anyone. It's just enforceable by the parties themselves, but we find that because they agree only to things they want to agree to, they're actually very proactive about going out there and performing what they've agreed to do.
We are at the end of our time, a little over actually. Does anyone have any questions here at this point? No one elsewhere, David?
No. I'm not quite sure. We seem to have dropped, Bairnsdale's dropped out. I don't know whether they're actually still listening in. I can hear them.
We're still
But we
here.
don't, oh, we do have visual. Excellent. Any questions there, Helen, from your room?
There are actually. I've just got a question about the mediation process. So with the example we went through with Vera, what would happen if one of those parties didn't want to participate in mediation? How could the conflict be resolved then?
Mediation is a voluntary process, so we can't compel parties to attend. It's about inviting them to a session and seeing if they're willing to at least talk to us. And I think we do, as assessment officers, take the opportunity to remind parties of the advantages of going through that process. It's free, it's confidential. A lot of times parties may come to the conclusion they don't have much to lose to come along to a session. There are also things that may spur them on. You know, we talked a bit before about crisis points with funding and that kind of thing. There are often rules in their own constitutions that sort of dictate that they must attend mediation. At the end of the day, we are a voluntary process, but if someone else decides that they have to come, then that's sort of their business. We've certainly encountered that before as well. But yeah, those crisis points around funding might be enough just to sort of spur them on to come along as well.
So John, just very quickly, and continuing with that question, just say X is not willing to come with Y.
Mm-hmm.
Is there an opportunity for X to come and speak to you and suss out the system and what it will mean for them and then make the decision, or do both have to come together in some way?
With regards to a mediation session itself, both parties
Sure.
will typically be attending. We provide a lot of advice. In fact, you know, I think it's, you know, something like 30% of our calls actually go to an approach for mediation. So I think parties are often calling us and perhaps haven't even heard of mediation before, and we're that first contact with them, so we provide that as early as possible. As I said before, you know, often I'll have a file that, you know, opens in January and then it doesn't go to mediation until June because parties take a long time to decide if it's going to be appropriate. The dispute changes, things expand or contract with regards to their issues, and I think, you know, they do a continuous assessment process of their own dispute, and it's really just about finding the right time. I think there's quite a lot of judgment there, as with all of these services, about finding the right time to engage and decide that it's the right, you know, to approach the other party.
So John, just on that point, so what would be the process if one party wanted to initiate contact with you?
Mm-hmm.
How would that, you know, how would that work?
It's typically done via a phone call. We also get some emails as well, but most of our assessment is conducted over the phone. The chief reason for that being that at the end of the day you have to communicate at mediation, and we have to conduct an assessment of how you communicate, so we can't do it just via email. They talk to us, and then essentially based on an assessment of that dispute we would offer an approach to the other party via a letter. It does come from the Department of Justice, so I guess I often say that whilst it's just an invitation to call us, people do sort of see the Department of Justice letterhead and decide that it might be worthwhile at least investigating what this service is. And then, of course, when and if they call us, we take the opportunity to provide a disclosure statement about what the issue is. And it's usually quite small and neutral statement, and then get their side of things and whether it's something, explore whether it's something that they're willing to mediate over.
John, also just want to quickly ask where there is a language difficulty, do you employ interpreters to work in the mediation session?
Yes, we have an interpreter service that we engage. They're an independent contractor. Sometimes people ask if they can bring along their mum or their sister to interpret for them. That's not available, unfortunately. We do need an independent person just to make sure that that process, you know, remains neutral and the other party's not disadvantaged.
Helen?
Helen, are there any more questions from Bairnsdale?
No, no further questions, thanks.
Thank you. Okay, well, it's 1:10. It's probably time
We should wrap.
for a conclusion. Thank you, people from Bairnsdale, for logging in. Thank you for our online listeners. We'll probably send you a survey monkey for evaluation.